If a player on the defending team stands next to the payload, it becomes contested and stops moving. Except for when it doesn't. Uh-oh. The payload is represented by a 3D model, but it is actually a singular point in space that follows a spline path through the map. The movement along this path is dictated by game mode logic, which you should already be familiar with. Attackers can move the payload forward along the path. Defenders can prevent the payload from moving forward. And 10 seconds of inactivity will move the payload backward along the path. Most of the time, these are the only rules that govern payload movement, but there are some instances where this is not true. Consider checkpoints. When the payload activates a checkpoint, it enters a state where it cannot be pushed. In this state, the movement of the payload is no longer governed by the rules mentioned earlier. Instead, payload movement is overridden for the duration of the scripted sequence. Overriding objective logic makes sense in this case. The payload has to wait for the gate to open before passing, and the pause gives defenders time to stabilize. But there are some cases that make less sense. Cases where the payload is scripted to move forward. Dorado Last is one area where this happens. Once this gate is reached, payload movement is controlled by the scripted sequence. Attackers can't push it, and defenders can't stop it. The payload becomes an unstoppable force until it passes through the gate. You might think that this isn't a big deal, and in quick play it's not. But for competitive play, there is one glaring problem. The payload can be captured during this scripted movement.
I'm sorry, aren't we on the cart?
77 quindecillion 777 quad you.
I'm sorry, can anybody explain to me what the f has happened? What is this trash game?
Since the payload was being moved via script rather than game mode logic, it was on an inevitable journey to being captured. There was nothing that could be done.
What the f?
Interestingly, this edge case used to be even more broken in the past. Here's the same spot on Dorado back in 2016. The payload has moved past the capture zone during the scripted movement. Notice how the red team has more distance pushed than blue team. The server would not register that the game should end if the payload was captured during scripted movement. The attackers have already won the game, it's just that nobody knows it yet. And here is the same bug, but on Eichenwald.
Wait, no, we just have to push it like a tiny little bit past that. Wait, what? Why? 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 Jeff, why? Jeff! We're in front of it, Jeff! Jeff! Jeff, why?
Yeah.
What's going on?
In total, there are 7 maps with scripted forward movement, 2 of which can be exploited to capture the payload while contested. Those 2 maps are the ones we just examined, Dorado and Eichenwald. The other maps have payloads that cannot be captured during the scripted movement, since overtime is forcibly enabled. This is probably done since the objective is changing from the control point to the payload, and it would be unfair if the overtime meter ran out before the payload leaves its holding area.
The payload is approaching its destination. Draw.
The new hybrid maps in Overwatch 2 have surprisingly long scripted movement distances.
Objective A captured. Escort the payload.
and the payload on Numbani automatically moves a staggering 6 centimeters. But that's not all. There is one more map that used to have scripted forward movement, Route 66. Currently in this map, the payload will never move through the first checkpoint gate automatically. But in the beta version of Overwatch, the cart did move through the gate automatically. Notice how the payload indicator advances even though there are no players on cart. What makes this weird is that this was patched before the game launched, being explicitly referred to as a bug. Why is this instance of scripted movement considered a bug, but not the scripted movement on Dorado and Eichenwald? The scripted movement on these two maps have been in the game for years, even carrying over into Overwatch 2. We may never know the answer. Just like I don't know how to end this video. Thanks for sticking around.